Facebook's already taken down his Facebook page that even said that Trump was a threat to democracy.
Florida Congresswoman Laurel Lee of the House Homeland Security Committee is also on that task force.
It is shocking that we find ourselves here today. Two of the things that we identified early in the Butler task force were the concept of the perimeter, how broad the security perimeter was, and second, the level of resources that have been assigned to President Trump. And here we see again that both of those things are failures. So, it is not enough for Democrats to wait until after the fact and say political violence is wrong. They should be repudiating right now the constant rhetoric against President Trump about being a threat to democracy. The second thing that we need to see happening immediately is that President Biden and Vice President Harris should call for a full presidential level detail to be assigned to President Trump.
An Ohio-based pro-family activist and former congressional candidate has a message for Kamala Harris and ABC. Haitians do eat wild animals in Springfield.
Much has been made about the one-sided fact-checking during last week's presidential debate on ABC. One blatant example was moderator David Muir's statement that the city manager of Springfield denied accounts by local residents that the Haitian migrants were eating wild animals. Janet Porter is founder and president of Faith to Action.
While Kamala cackled about the Haitians eating animals, turns out that President Trump was right. I released a video, just a 60-second video, but it includes a police report where they're stealing geese, they're beheading them, they're cooking them in this barbaric stew, they're stealing farm animals, they're gutting roadkill. This is all really happening from the citizens from Springfield that actually witnessed it.
And Porter says the residents of the West Central Ohio community are tired of being terrorized by 20,000 Haitian invaders.
One of the women talked about, she's only 95 pounds. There's men shouting in another language in my front yard, throwing mattresses and trash. And she said, who's going to protect me? And the answer is very, very clear. It's not Kamala. She's the one that brought him here. It's President Trump. If you're going to come in and you're going to start eating animals, this is not acceptable.
I'm Chad Groening.
And finally, Ashley Strohmeyer has the latest on what could become Tropical Storm Helene.
The East Coast is bracing for a possible tropical storm. Potential Tropical Cyclone 8 is expected to strengthen to Tropical Storm Helene. Right now, it's churning off the coast of the Carolinas. The storm is expected to make landfall in South Carolina later today.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
This weekend, we'll talk with Dr. Calvin Beisner of the Cornwall Alliance about the climate change movement and the departure from traditional science.
People are saying, look, it just doesn't matter that the models are overprojecting. Eventually, it's going to come to bite us. And there, I think what they've done is they've just abandoned scientific method completely, and they've gone instead to fear.
The Stand Radio, Saturdays at 4 and Sundays at 8 p.m. Central on AFR.
Welcome to today's issues. Join us for the next hour as we offer a Christian response to the issues of the day. Here's your host, Ed Vitagliano.
And welcome, everybody, to today's issues. Ed Vitagliano sitting in for Tim Wildman this week. I am joined in studio by Fred Jackson. Good morning, Fred.
Good morning. I almost said Tim. I'm sorry. Ed.
It's all right. It's not an insult. Yeah, that's no problem, Steve. It's okay.
George.
Yeah,
John
George.
Paul. Ringo.
That laughter you hear in the background is Dr. Alex McFarland, co-host of Exploring the Word with Brother Bert Harper. Good morning to you, Alex.
Good morning, gentlemen. It's an honor to be with you.
And I think you're going to be with us all week except for Friday, right?
Yes, sir. Through Thursday on today's issues, and it's a great honor to do so.
Well, we always love having you on, bringing not only your expertise about what's happening in the culture, but also a biblical perspective. We're going to ask you about some of that, some of the stuff that you've been experiencing here later on in the show. Mm-hmm. I also want to introduce someone who has been on today's issues, but not as a co-host. Now, folks, we have a lot of folks out. Tim's out. Wesley's out. Steve Jordal's out. So we are just scraping the bottom of the barrel here to bring on
nice intro.
Another co-host. My son, Tony Vitagliano, one of the vice presidents here at AFA. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Glad to be here. Yeah, I got the Finally put on a jersey, get off the bench.
Yes.
Coaches let me play.
That's
so.
right. We'll let you play.
I come in when it's there's 2 minutes left and we're up by 40. That's when I come in.
Well, I'm not sure we've ever been up by 40 on this show, but we have been up. We've won our fair share of games. But Tony is about as well informed as anybody I know. And I told him, I said, hey, we got a lot of folks out next week talking about this week. I said, what would you think about coming on? And he's going to be a trooper and help us out some this week, today and Wednesday and Thursday, with our bench basically cleared out. So, Alex, tell us where you are. Are you at home? Are you on the road? Where are you at today?
Well, yeah, I'm back at home in Greensboro, North Carolina. But, hey, big shout out to the folks of Richmond, Virginia. Angie and I were there Thursday through last night. I had a great weekend and, spoke in a couple of contexts, a couple of men's breakfasts, did a biblical worldview thing for youth. But yesterday, had at an outdoor venue called Hanover Farms, we had an outdoor service yesterday, and just several hundred people came to the altar. Several people came to accept Christ, including got to lead a French lady to Christ. It was really exciting. But hundreds of teenagers praying for their school, praying for America. But I want to say this to all the people in Richmond. There's a lot of love for AFR in the greater Richmond area. People came down from Northern Virginia, the D.C. area. And guys, maybe just some good news. I know there's a lot happening in the culture, a lot of things that are very concerning, and understandably so. But the Spirit of God is still working. People are getting saved. When we pray for revival, the Spirit of God is moving. And so we had a great weekend in Richmond, and a big shout-out to all the churches that helped put that together. And, everybody, guess what? People asked me, they said, hey, tell me about Bert Harper. You and Bert are on Exploring the Word. But the other thing was lots of appreciation for Tim Wildman.
Amen.
People were saying, we love Tim Wildman. He's really, really funny. He's very witty. And anyway, seeing the groundswell of love and support for AFR when I'm on the road every weekend, it's uplifting, guys.
Well, and I always love having you on today's issues, Alex, because what you were talking about, having some good news, it is very easy for Christians. First of all, if they're listening to AFR, they're getting informed about what's happening. So, the old expression, ignorance is bliss, there's some truth, quite a bit of truth to that. If you don't know what's going on, you don't know a lot of the bad stuff that's happening. So people who are listening to AFR, who read the Stand magazine, who go to American Family News, all those kinds of things, they are informed. It can be heavy and weigh on them the kinds of the types of wickedness that seem to be prospering. And it's very refreshing to hear when you tell us some of these stories about what God is doing, to remember that God is on the throne, Alex,
Amen.
And he is working in people's hearts, and God is not caught off guard by anything. Sounds trite because we say this a lot, but when it comes to politics and culture, it's important to remember that, right?
Well, it is, and let me just say this. I'm very privileged, traveling. People hear us on the American Family Radio Network, and they hear Exploring the Word. I got to tell you guys this. There was a medical doctor. I met several medical doctors that were at our events in Richmond, but this particular medical doctor was talking about how they felt ostracized in their practice because everybody is going for the transgender Kool-Aid, and this particular medical doctor explained that, on a Zoom call with, several dozen physicians, finally spoke up and said, hey, by the way, we are physicians. We've got to remember patient care for a male is different than patient care for a female, because a male and a female are different, and that this person said they felt kind of alienated because they dared to speak out against the transgender, ideology. And this doctor said, many a day I get in my car to drive home, I'm so beaten down. That was the term they used. Said, I feel so beaten down. And yet I listened to Exploring the Word, and they said, you and Bert with your Southern accent, it lifts me up. And by the time I get home, I'm just very uplifted, and thank you. And here's the thing. When Christians come together, and like we saw in Richmond, churches of all strata, but believers, people who not only believe in Jesus, but believe in morality and truth as we do. I will tell you guys, and everybody across America, please take this to heart. When Christians come together and pray, and we just seek God's intervention and the presence of God's Holy Spirit, things happen, good things happen. God sends revival, and revival is possible, but we need to come together and pray for it.
Amen. Well, I'll just say this one additional thing. Thank you, Alex, for sharing that. This one additional thing, I remember talking to an atheist. This is way back when my wife and I were in our first ministry position in Arizona, Scottsdale, Arizona. I was talking to an atheist, and we were going back and forth. You know how these things unfold. But this gentleman said, well, because I was talking about the power of prayer, and that's what you were talking about. And he said, well, when you pray for something and something happens, that's just coincidence. And I said, okay, that's fine. So coincidences happen when I pray. All right. So, I think I had heard that from somebody in apologetics. I said, that's quite a power to have. You pray and coincidences happen. And I was trying to play off his point, but Christians have to believe in the power of prayer. It's not coincidences. Obviously, I was joking around with them, but God does answer prayer. And when we pray things that God wants us to pray for, talking about people getting saved and a nation coming back from darkness, these are things that God wants to see happen. And we know we're praying according to God's will. So thank you for that, Alex. All right, Fred, every Monday we start off this way saying, well, I guess nothing happened over the weekend. Wow, a second assassination attempt on President Trump's life.
Yeah, it was amazing. The former president, I'm told, as he often does when he's at home in Florida at Mar-a-Lago, he'll go out and play a round of golf at one of his golf courses there in West Palm Beach. And so it was yesterday. He was on the greens. I think he was about halfway through. And shots rang out. And the shots came from the Secret Service because the Secret Service detected the muzzle of a rifle through some bushes and a fence. And so they shot. And it was a good thing. They were on alert because there was a man there, and we're told with an AK-47. He had, besides where he had put the muzzle of that rifle through, he had backpacks with ceramic tiles in it. I assume that he was expecting gunfire from the Secret Service.
And that would be something that he might use in a vest.
A vest to protect himself. Anyway, when the Secret Service responded, he ran, got in his vehicle. He had parked his vehicle, I think it was an SUV, parked his vehicle to make a quick escape, the police are telling us. But the police are saying this was well arranged, well planned. And they chased this guy down, and about 40 miles away, they arrested him. His name is Ryan, and some anchors on some network newscasts are saying Ruth. It's spelled R-O-U-T-H. Some are saying Routh.
Right.
Either one. We'll get it nailed down because he is appearing in court this morning.
Right.
Before our program is over. What do we know about this guy? If you will go to afn.net, I just put a story up with this man's picture on it. Here's what we know so far. He is 58 years old. He is currently living in Hawaii. However, he has spent a good portion of his life living in North Carolina. He seems to be known for a lot of entries on social media. He has talked a lot about the war in Ukraine. He has tried to influence and tried to have an impact on recruiting people to fight for the Ukrainians in this war with Russia. However, in this Associated Press story that I just posted on afn.net, it says Ryan Ruth portrayed himself online as a man who built housing for homeless people in Hawaii, tried to recruit fighters for Ukraine to defend itself against Russia, and described his support and then disdained for Donald Trump, even urging Iran to kill him. Now, this is from one of his social media posts. "You are free to assassinate Trump," he wrote of Iran in an apparently self-published book in 2023, Ukraine's Unwinnable War. So authorities are saying they are being helped greatly by the fact that he put a lot of information, his feelings, his sentiments about things on social media. He apparently in the past has given to both parties, but most recently he has expressed great opposition to Donald Trump. So that is what we know so far in all of this. Now, this happened about, I think it was 2:30, 3 o'clock Eastern time yesterday afternoon. I've talked to some folks this morning. They didn't know about it until this morning or last evening. If you tend to stay away from the news media on the weekend to give yourself a break from it all.
Yeah, you're with family, you're watching maybe some football or whatever, taking it easy. Sometimes people do take a break from the news.
So, but there was reaction last evening. Some people are saying that, maybe this man, and we don't know this, but maybe he was influenced by a lot of the rhetoric that you've heard against Donald Trump, especially in recent months, and it's election season.
Right.
Everywhere from, Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to play you a little montage of probably what you have heard from critics of Donald Trump in recent months. Cut number 3.
What, in your view, constitutes the primary threat to freedom and democracy at home?
Donald Trump.
Trump is an existential, urgent threat to our democracy.
They're running against democracy.
He's willing to sacrifice our democracy.
Casting former President Trump as a threat to democracy. Donald Trump is a great threat to our democracy.
Well, you probably recognized a few of those voices, President Biden and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Those aren't small fry.
No.
Those aren't just two-bit celebrities.
That's right. That's what we've heard. And believe it or not, and I guess we can if you know anything about MSNBC, they were actually, some of their people last night were blaming Trump's rhetoric for what happened yesterday on that golf course, cut number 4.
Do you expect to hear anything from the Trump campaign about toning down the rhetoric, toning down the violence, or would that be atypical of the former president?
Well, Alex, remember back to the assassination attempt on President Trump's life and how, there was talk of a new tone, and it did seem like he was, just trying to take it down a few notches. But then by the end of his convention speech, we were kind of back to where we started.
So there you have it. I guess we shouldn't be surprised when we hear it from MSNBC and some of the other far left-leaning networks that are out there. They're not going to blame anybody else. They're not going to blame Democrats' rhetoric. No, it's Donald Trump's fault himself for bringing this upon himself.
Blame the victim.
Blame the victim.
Tony, I've been following politics since I was in the 7th grade, and I technically lived through the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I was only 5 years old. I do remember my mom weeping. She got a phone call from my dad. He told her what had happened, and she broke down and cried, something that a child rarely sees in a home that's, got a healthy dynamic anyway. So I do remember that happened. I was old enough, 10 years old, when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated and Robert F. Kennedy was shot. And I do remember other attempts. Reagan was shot. There was an attempt on Gerald Ford's life. But I cannot recall anything like what we're living through right now. Two assassination attempts on President Trump. And I got to say, I was going to say I'm shocked. I guess I would say I'm outraged. I'm not shocked that the left-wing media seems to not only, I mean, they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to characterize Donald Trump as an existential threat to our democracy when someone like Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi uses language like that. There's no pushback from the media. So they want to have that kind of, you talk about outrageous, divisive, violent language, and then try to flip the script and say it's Trump's fault for the for having this language that's ratcheted up. I want to say I'm shocked. I'm not naive about the mainstream media, but it is a source of great outrage for me.
Yeah, guys, let me jump in here for a second, because I think really legally, when you hear, Pelosi and Harris and all of the left-wing Democrat players, they'll say Trump is an existential threat. I want to come back to that. But I think legally this is reckless endangerment by language. Now, we have laws about libel and slander, defaming people, saying things that are false. But honestly, saying things and repeating things and just very impassioned accusations that ultimately move people like, Ryan Wesley Ruth, or however you pronounce his last name, to try to take the president's life. And by the way, I'm just curious. I would like to know, and maybe you guys have discussed this, how did he know where Trump would be playing golf, that he might feasibly, take a shot at the president? I would.
It wasn't
think,
on his public. We don't know. It wasn't on his public schedule,
yeah,
as far
exactly.
as I know. So
how did the president's whereabouts yesterday get leaked to this, malicious person? But here's my point. They use this word that I would say probably 90% of Americans don't even know what it means, existential. Because, there's a philosophy, existentialism. But it sounds very impressive, like, oh, my goodness, there's a legitimate threat. And this lie about former President Trump has been repeated so often that I think a case could be made this amounts to reckless endangerment.
Yeah, well, Tony, I mean, it is, like I said, they're having their cake and eating it too. They're using that kind of language against Trump, and then when someone tries to kill him, they blame him for the state of the political landscape.
Let me tell you a story in 3 parts, okay? So I've got Representative Hakeem Jeffries' Twitter feed pulled up. 20 hours ago, he posted, this would have been around 2:30 p.m. So what time did the event occur, Brett?
Around that time, Eastern time.
Okay, so we'll chalk this one up to maybe poor timing, but Representative Hakeem Jeffries posts this: extreme MAGA Republicans are the party of a national abortion ban and Trump's Project 2025. We must stop them. All right? So we'll just chalk that up. Poor timing, right? He may not have known all the details at the time. 18 hours ago, that'd be 2 hours later, he gives, like all the Democrats, the obligatory political violence has no place in a democratic society, right? We're so thankful.
I'm very relieved.
Oh, I'm so relieved. This morning, 4 hours ago, fact check. This is also from Representative Hakeem Jeffries. Extreme MAGA Republicans don't simply have concepts about how to control your life. They have a detailed plan, and it's called Project 2025. So they didn't waste not a whole lot of time. You got to give the obligatory. We're so glad he's safe, but then we're going right back to we must stop them. They want to control your life. Trump is an existential threat, to Alex's point. So you're right. It's a have our cake and eat it too. I wouldn't be surprised if the news cycle or the media tries to spin this. Well, if he's not bleeding this time, then does it really count?
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I hope we don't become so comfortable with these horrific events that we just start glossing over them, or the media starts glossing over them. So.
Yeah, because as far as we know, Ruth did not take a shot. Nope. The Secret Service, to their credit, although there'll be further questions as to how he got even within that distance, because with a scope, as has been said, That's not a hard shot for somebody who's trained.
Yes.
Okay. However, they did spot it.
Mm-hmm.
This gun coming through a fence
Thank
at
the
a
good Lord.
bush.
Thank the good Lord.
Yeah. So, and then they opened fire.
Yeah.
But listen, we still haven't gotten the questions answered, Alex, from the last assassination attempt.
Right.
Now we've got another one. I've got questions like we all do. The media, if they were interested, they'd have questions as well, talking about the mainstream media, as to how this guy found out, your point, how he found out that President Trump was going to be golfing there, how he got to that kind of place, why the Secret Service, maybe they do have this, I don't know, why they don't have drones up surveying the area around there, and you see a guy parked, kneeling by a fence with a gun. Do you really have to hope that a Secret Service agent glances in that direction and spots it? Why they don't have drones out? And
again, the sovereignty of God. July 13, we all know 2 or 3 millimeters difference, and we would be having a very different conversation. And I'm not name dropping, but I spent some time with Eric Trump at the Republican convention, and Eric Trump said, the Lord saved my dad's life. And I said, yes. But again, to see a gun barrel in some shrubbery, I mean, again, like you said, Fred, thank the good Lord. God sovereignly protected Donald Trump. And let me just say this, guys, and feel free to respond. Look, my hope is in Jesus. My eyes are not on a man. But at the same time, Trump deserves credit. He is putting his life on the line to try and help turn this country around. He doesn't need this. I mean, he could be sitting on a beach, spending his last years chilling out. This guy's put his life on the line.
Absolutely, and this is the second time. And I got to tell you, I think we're all saying, God forbid, but how many opportunities are these folks going to be given? And the Secret Service, I hate to second guess people who are supposedly willing to take a bullet. On July 13th, his team, Secret Service team, they did surround him. They were willing, it looked like, to take the next bullet. The Secret Service is doing their best, but how many more chances are going to be taken at the potential loss of a presidential candidate? We'll be right back, folks. Please join us.
It's my turn.
Here is your host for My Turn, Don Wildman.
Once upon a time in the long, long ago, the sun and the wind got into an argument. They were arguing about which of the two was more powerful. Back and forth they argued, each stating why he was more powerful than the other. Well, this argument went on for several days. Finally, the moon, being as tired as he was wise, told the two that he had had enough. Instead of the two continually arguing about who was more powerful, they should have a test. The sun and the wind agreed to such an idea. They would settle the question once and for all. As the wind looked down upon the earth, he saw a man walking along a road. I suggest, stated the wind, that we see who can make the man remove his coat. The one which makes the man remove his coat will be declared the most powerful. The wind was thinking of the force he had with which to blow the coat off the man's back. But the sun agreed to the test. It was decided that the wind would try first. The sun backed away and went behind a cloud to allow the wind first chance. Well, the wind began to blow, without much force at first, but then a little stronger. And, much to the surprise of the wind, instead of taking the coat off, the man only pulled it tighter around him. Soon the wind was blowing at full force, and the wind made the man colder and colder. And the colder he got, the more he pulled his coat around him to protect him from the wind. Finally, exhausted from the ordeal, the wind gave up. I cannot make him pull off his coat, the wind said. And if I can't, I know you can't, he said to the sun. Well, the sun didn't say anything, Very slowly he moved from behind the cloud and began to send his warm rays down upon the man. As it began to get warm, the man unbuttoned his coat and let it hang loose. Then the sun, in all its brilliance, unleashed its powerful rays of warmth upon the man. Within a short time, the man was taking off his coat. "You win," said the wind. "You did by warmth what I could not do by force." You know, it's that way in life. Man can achieve by the warmth of love what he can never achieve by the winds of force. Of all the power in the universe, love is the strongest. Man will gladly die for those he loves and seek ways to destroy those who force. Robert Burton was right when he wrote, "No cord nor cable can so forcibly draw or hold so fast as love can do with a twined thread." You can blow men down a path by force, but in the process they will not stay with you. They will only fight back at you, as the man with the coat did the wind. But if you love them, they will go with you no matter how far nor how hard the way, and they will go voluntarily and gladly. It was not by accident that the Galilean made these two the greatest of all commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. Many of us who have followed the example of the wind would do well to follow the example of the sun.
This has been My Turn with Don Wildman, a production of the American Family Association.
Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Matthew 19, verse 14.
American Family Radio. This is today's issues. Email your comments to comments@afr.net. Past broadcasts of today's issues are available for listening and viewing in the archive at afr.net. Now, back to more of today's issues.
And welcome back. Ed Vitagliano sitting in for Tim Wildman this week. I am joined in studio by Fred Jackson, one of our vice presidents, Tony Vitagliano. Yes, if that name sounds familiar, he is my son. And Dr. Alex McFarland is on with us remotely, not in studio. We are discussing, folks, the second attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. The suspect, again, we have to say alleged assassination attempt. The suspect has been identified as Ryan Ruth. Some in the media are pronouncing it Routh, but I think as things unfold, he is in court. I think at some point here this morning, we will be able to, I think, nail down what we're supposed to call this guy. But Fred, we want to continue talking about this story a little bit because there's so many moving parts. What else do you have about what we know so far?
Well, in the wake of the first assassination attempt, I'm sure most people are now familiar, a lot of focus has been on the Secret Service.
Right.
And what many people feel was a great failure in what happened in Pennsylvania back in July in that first attempt. As we reported, just off the top of the show this morning, it appears in this case the Secret Service responded correctly and quickly, which probably saved the former president's life in this case. But there are going to be questions once again. Right now, the level of protection the former president is getting is in question. Because coming out of the first assassination attempt, it seemed like this was Team B or Team C of the Secret Service. We have sent...
And maybe inadequate numbers as well.
Yes.
Too small a team.
There were some reports that some of the people who were on detail there in Pennsylvania, they had not been involved with the Secret Service before.
Right.
Their training consisted of watching a few videos before they were put in the field. So this is just going to intensify. Jason Chaffetz, who is a former member of Congress and was involved when he was in Congress with overseeing the Secret Service, He was asked to respond to this latest attempt on the former president's life. Cut number 2.
Secretary Mayorkas is the point person. He's the one that makes the decision on who gets protection, who doesn't, who gets the level of protection, and who doesn't. He's in charge of billions of dollars. It is totally, completely on Secretary Mayorkas at this point. You have an acting director. That means that the secretary has to take an elevated role in doing that, and they are failing in this.
All right, so he's pointing the finger at Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. He ultimately is responsible for this.
And he's referring to the fact that there is an acting secretary for the Secret Service because Kim Cheadle, who was, had to step down because of the controversy over the Secret Service after the first attempt.
Yes, and after that first attempt, House Speaker Johnson formed a committee to investigate what happened in Pennsylvania. And one of the representatives on that committee is Congresswoman Laura Lee of Florida. She was asked about this latest attempt against the former president's life. Cut number 5.
It is shocking that we find ourselves here today. 2 of the things that we identified early in the Butler task force were the concept of the perimeter, how broad the security perimeter was, and second, the level of resources that have been assigned to President Trump. And here we see again that both of those things are failures. So, it is not enough for Democrats to wait until after the fact and say political violence is wrong. They should be repudiating right now the constant rhetoric against President Trump about being a threat to democracy. The second thing that we need to see happening immediately is that President Biden and Vice President Harris should call for a full presidential level detail to be assigned to President Trump.
Alex, I'm not sure where this is going to wind up in terms of the Secret Service. All I know is that we have a former president who, as we have been hearing, is not getting adequate protection. And make no mistake, if the radical left or whoever has been behind, we still don't know everything we need to know about the 2 individuals for these 2 assassination attempts. If they are successful and somebody assassinates President Trump, this country is going to tear itself apart. I don't know why the Democrats are playing this so foolishly. They ought to be understanding that violence begets violence. We're not just talking about lobbing verbal hand grenades. We're talking about the potential for this country to unravel overnight.
Yeah, and by the way, when they say things like, Trump advocates a national abortion ban, I would argue, and Ed, I want to come back to the rhetoric that has fomented this violence. I want to come back to that. But let me say there is a national abortion ban, and it's called the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution guarantees the right to life for all human beings. Therefore, there is legal protection for the unborn. Even, my friend, the late atheist Christopher Hitchens, we were colleagues, we debated. I actually had Hitchens on AFR back in 2009. But even Christopher Hitchens was unabashedly pro-life because he said the U.S. Constitution guarantees the right to life for all human beings. And so I wish more elected officials and even ministers would point out that we have legal protection for the unborn. But when Pelosi, I remember in Trump's last State of the Union address, which was a great speech, by the way, Pelosi was behind him, rolling her eyes, doing these very pronounced eye rolls, being as dismissive and disrespectful as possible. And when Trump finished his speech, Pelosi ripped her copy of the speech in half, very prominently on camera, which, by the way, the copy of the State of the Union is government property. Right. And in a technical sense, what she did to, very visibly rip it in half, that's breaking the law. But here's my point. She said Trump was a non-president. She said Trump was an invalid president. Hillary Clinton said that as well. Now, here's my point. To repeatedly say to the American people, Trump is a non-president. His election was invalid. There's this mindset created, and I think it has trickled down to the B grade and C grade Secret Service protection that has jeopardized the life of a former president, is because the left, in their rhetoric, which again I say amounts to reckless endangerment, that they've tried to be dismissive, minimize the fact that, like him or not, he is a president and for life gets, or at least should get, A-level, top-tier Secret Service protection.
You know, Tony, I'm 66, so more and more you're going to have to get used to me referring back to the good old days. Okay, so I do remember when political discourse, to Alex's point, you could have conversations, you could have rational, even heated conversations with people who are the polar opposite of your position, kind of like Alex and Christopher Hitchens. But I remember this politically. I remember this politically when we had disagreements, but at the end of the day, we consider ourselves Americans. I never in my whole life, and there were lots of politicians that I didn't like. I never thought, I hope someone puts a bullet in his head or her head. Never thought about that. That was crossing some line that really was reserved for we joke about banana republics, but that's the way we always viewed that kind of behavior. But now it seems like we have gotten to the place where both sides absolutely hate each other. And I'm not sure, except maybe in 1968, the late 60s over the Vietnam War, or maybe even the Civil War, I cannot remember times when this country was this bitterly divided.
Yeah, I think it speaks more so to it's indicative of a spiritual decay. So as our nation has moved away from God and a love of God and a respect for our biblical foundation and our biblical principles, we've shifted into this view of power being absolute. That power is what you want. And so what you're seeing, the result is that there's a power vacuum, and people on both sides of the aisle, we're seeing more and more on the left, are realizing that in order to seize power, because that's all that matters to them, right? There is no moral or biblical stopgap to them. In order to seize power, you say and do whatever you have to. And so that's what you're seeing. This is the result of a spiritual decay, and the left has no desire to adhere to in any way, shape, or form the biblical foundations of our country, which roots us in our polite political discourse, right? It's a reason why. For instance, Christians, we can have a conversation about something and disagree on topics, but we're rooted in our love for Jesus. So in the end, we love each other. There should be some reflection of that in our society, and there's just not. There's just no reflection of hey, we don't have to agree on everything, but at the end of the day, we're both Americans. So let's just we'll disagree and let's go have a cup of coffee. Now it's you're Hitler,
yes,
and I'm
right.
I'm an anti-fascist. I'm fighting a righteous war, and whatever it takes for me to win is what I'm going to do.
Alex, this is a good point, because when we used to believe, even non-Christians believed that we're all made in the image of God. If you believe that we're all created in the image of God, and I need to respect the person with whom I have this intense disagreement, and if you believe, even in some general sense, that we're all going to have to answer for our lives, then power is not the only thing that matters. What God thinks is the only thing that matters in the end, and I have to conduct myself in a way that reflects that final exam at some point. But if power is all that matters, then you're going to find, Fred, you talk about this a lot. We'll get Alex's take, and then you change even the occupation of a journalist. because it doesn't, now we're not just trying to be fair and report the facts and let people decide. No, now we are power players too. Same thing with corporations. This really is a reflection of, as Tony said, this spiritual decay.
You know, Ed, I smile when you said that, you know, you reflect back on, quote, the good old days. I do too, you know. I mean, I thank God that I grew up in that America where neighbors were neighborly, you know. When I grew up playing baseball up through high school, even when we lost, we were to walk out there, shake hands, and say, good game, you know?
Yeah.
There was an ethic of being a gracious loser. And I think about all through 2016 to 2020 when Hillary Clinton would say, he is an invalid president. This is an invalid presidency. Well, no, it wasn't. And in fact, you know, Trump handed the Biden administration the greatest economy, the lowest mortgage rates, secure border. There was peace in the Middle East, at least to a degree. And I think moving our embassy to Jerusalem was a great thing. But guys, I want to say this, that our nation right now, there's so much rancor and amicable discussion is almost forgotten. Fred and Ed, do you guys remember Firing Line with William F. Buckley?
Yes, remember it.
I would encourage people, go on YouTube and watch some of those shows. And I grew up, you know, in the 70s and 80s. My parents were very conservative Republican volunteers, and you know there was, you know, a lot of William F. Buckley and National Review in our house.
Yeah.
But Buckley would have these hour-long shows, and that he would get, you know, political rivals on there, but they would have these civil, very substantive discussions, and there might be disagreement, but at the end of the day, we're all Americans. We're fellow citizens and neighbors, and we might disagree, but it would be respectfully, and we would converse productively. And we just don't see that now, do we? By the way, I got to tell you one thing. I went to Liberty University. Well, very famously in the late 80s, Ted Kennedy spoke at Liberty University. Jerry Falwell, if there ever was an arch conservative, it was Jerry Falwell,
right,
who I knew very well, preached at Thomas Road Church. Anyway, Ted Kennedy was invited to speak at Liberty. If there were ever two polar opposites, conservative Falwell, arch liberal Kennedy. But Kennedy comes out at Liberty. It's on YouTube. People ought to watch it. And he says, well, Dr. Falwell and I agree. Now listen to this. Ted Kennedy said, we agree America was founded as a Christian nation. We just disagree about how to best serve the poor and do different things. But it was so conciliatory. It was so respectful. It was thought-provoking. But no Democrat now, and Ted Kennedy was a Democrat's Democrat.
Right.
But he said, we agree that America was founded as a Christian nation. Our rights are gifts from God. And I guess I would say the left, they would never say such things nowadays, would they, guys?
No, they wouldn't. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't Jerry Falwell catch some flack for having Ted Kennedy there?
Yes.
I think,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, in reflecting on where we are today and how we got here, I was still fairly young, but I do remember what happened during the Vietnam War in this country. And I come from Canada, but I was observing what was going on here. And remembering the protests on the campuses here, to me, that is when the kind of America is bad, we need to hate America and change it.
Right.
That whole movement started there. And so I to put it briefly, the rebellion against the good America started on our university campuses.
Yes.
And so we've had all of this time, and the product that has been produced by our university campuses, they are now lawyers.
Right.
They are now journalists. They run newsrooms.
They're judges.
They're judges. So if you want to know what has happened, and of course, journalism is my background. When I worked in network news in Canada, there was very stringent guidelines as to keep your opinion out of your news.
Right.
When you're writing news, your opinion doesn't go in there. And I've talked about this before. It all changed, I think, back in the 80s. To the point now, or I am just amazed when I come in each day and I look at the Associated Press, for one example.
Right.
Every story about Democrats is a positive spin.
Right.
They can do no wrong. The only time they piled on Democrats is when Joe Biden had that bad debate.
Right.
That's right.
But the reason they piled on Joe Biden was, oh, no, we're not going to win. I'm talking about journalists.
Right.
Our team is not going to win.
That's right.
So now we have to pile on Biden.
After covering for Biden,
yes,
for the last 3.5 years,
yes,
in terms of his cognitive ability.
But he's not going to win for us, so now we're going to treat him as the bad guy. Now you've got Kamala Harris, and you would think that this woman walks on water if you listen and watch the mainstream media. It is absolutely amazing. But behind all of that is still that hate America.
Yeah.
We have to change it. I was watching I think it was an Instagram video over the weekend where they were repeating a line that Kamala Harris has used through the years that is actually a Marxist line, which basically says we have to undo what we have now to make it better. And what they're saying is we have to get rid of what we have. In other words, what America has been known for all of these years. We have to get rid of that in order to bring something new in. And the something new, folks, and I know some people, some listeners may say, you guys talk about Marxism all the time, but we're not kidding. This is, they want to bring in, Barack Obama said, we're going to change the country, we're going to change the world.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You've really got to remember, this is consistent with what Kamala Harris wants to do. Folks, when she has flip-flopped on all of these issues, that's just to get elected. You got to look at what Kamala Harris was doing as a district attorney in San Francisco, as an attorney general in California, and really you've got to go back, and that's why it is really important to do your homework. That is what she really stands for, and that is Marxism.
You know, Tony, if you're going to, we don't have a monarchy, okay? Monarchies are almost non-existent. You might have figurehead things, monarchies like in the UK, but we don't have monarchies anymore. So the two options that I think are practical are you can have free societies where the people, because they are, like our founders believed, they are self-limiting because of their religious faith and the morality that comes from that religious faith. So you have a free country based upon religion, like the United States, Christianity. Or you have a society that throws God to the sidelines. And what options do you have left? You have ultimately either fascism or communism. So when we say the left is firmly rooted in the Marxist worldview, it's because if you reject God, where else are you going to go?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to go. The more people's morality unravels, like we see in our country, the bigger the government has to be, and the more control it has to take in a person's life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't know to date what nation is still functioning or didn't devolve into, like what you mentioned, some form of dictatorship or totalitarian regime or some form of socialism or communism when they abandoned the roots of their civilization. And America's foundation is on biblical principles, on Judeo-Christian values. And what you're seeing is, as those have eroded, the elements of democracy that we value are being eroded.
Right.
I mean, I thought Trump had a great line during the debate. He was finally calling out the Democrats who have been championing themselves as the heralds of democracy, the protectors of democracy, when they threw out their duly elected primary candidate, 14 million votes, and they just discarded him.
Mm-hmm.
and put in Kamala Harris, who has never won a single vote. And they do that because it is more expedient to them to, like you mentioned, they when it looked like they were going to lose, that's when they turned on Joe Biden. They did that because it was more expedient to them to ensure they stay in power rather than honor the principles of democracy and a representative government.
You know, if you want a current day example, look at Venezuela.
Right.
You need to study what happened there. And to put it very briefly, because we're almost out of time, once the left wins an election, there is probably never going to be another free election again. Look what has happened in Venezuela.
That's right.
They had another election, air quotes there, recently.
Mm-hmm.
The opposition that we saw was very strong, but what has happened since that election day? It has been shut down. People arrested who disagree with the current dictator, and that's what he is. And that's what the left does. They will use terms like the other side is misinformation. We have to shut that down. That's what's been going on with social media in this country.
Yeah.
That's what Tim Walz said,
Yes.
the current vice presidential candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, he said that misinformation is not protected by the First Amendment. It's an outrageous statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to understand that misinformation is defined as that which goes against the leftist Democrat narrative.
Yes.
In other words, facts and truth. And I would just say to people, I know we're coming up on a break, so I'll be very brief. But look, having spoken or debated at 200 American universities and a couple in Canada too, Fred, beautiful Canada. Look, I love education. I believe in education, but you have to understand that these professors are ideologues, and their religion with cult-level zeal is to turn students socialist, Marxist, atheistic, communist. And so I understand the facts are not allowed. When they can't refute your facts, they must demonize and forcibly silence those that disagree.
Well, that's the choice, it seems to me, that our nation is heading towards. One fork or the other, and that road is going to be the one we take. All right, folks, we're going to take a 5-minute break for news. When we come back, Chris Woodward will be the news guy. Thanks to Fred, Ed Vitagliano, Tony Vitagliano, Dr. Alex McFarland will return. Hope you do too.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio. The Stand provides a Christian perspective on current issues that are important to your family. Produced by the American Family Association, this monthly magazine is full of articles and stories about people who are making a difference in their community and around the world. Sign up today and receive a free 6-month subscription. Visit thestand.net or call 1-800-326-4543. This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. Charges filed against the gunman in the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. Dana Marie McNichol in West Palm Beach, Florida, with the latest.
Ryan Routh has been charged with 2 charges: possession of firearm by a convicted felon and a possession of firearm with obliterated serial number. He walked in shackled with both his wrists and his feet. He also smiled while he walked into that courtroom. Our producer said he laughed with his attorney a couple of times, which was very interesting to learn a little bit more about his demeanor. We are learning also about his presence on social media. He posted multiple times about the former president. We also know public records show 58-year-old Ryan Routh had at least 100 run-ins with police.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle speaking out against the most recent assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Colorado Congressman Jason Crow is a Democrat and a member of the task force that's investigating the July assassination attempt against Trump.
Political violence has no place in our country, and Republicans and Democrats
must come together and say this is unacceptable. This should never happen. You don't need to be one side of a party or another to condemn this.
Meanwhile, former President Trump is expected to be back on the campaign trail later this week. Alexandria Hoff has more.
Trump was expected to announce a new cryptocurrency exchange tonight from Mar-a-Lago and plans to travel to Michigan tomorrow. And if the schedule remains, Trump will join his running mate J.D. Vance for a town hall in Flint tomorrow with razor-thin margins in Michigan. Trump and Vance have both been frequent visitors, both holding events there late last month. And this weekend, the vice presidential contender said that he learned his lesson on speaking for the former president when Trump at last week's debate denied a claim by Vance that the two had discussed vetoing a federal abortion ban if it came to Trump's desk. Vance also distanced himself from controversial social media personality Laura Loomer. Loomer, a Trump supporter, made disparaging remarks about Vice President Harris's Indian heritage.
American Family Association has proposed a resolution for the next Apple shareholder meeting. Chris Woodward has more.
AFA is asking Apple to do an assessment of the risk involved with not implementing what they proposed would be a child sexual abuse material scanning software on all Apple iCloud accounts. AFA Vice President Walker Wildman.
This was a proposal back in 2020 and 2021. Well, after concerns from privacy groups, Apple withdrew the plan to expand what's known as the CSAM scanning feature for iCloud accounts. And just in essence, what this software would do is it would scan for child sexual abuse material in Apple iCloud accounts and notify Apple and law enforcement if material was found. So this has broad ramifications when it comes to protecting children, and so we're wanting Apple to do a full review, a full study and report on the risk involved with not rolling out these additional child protection features.
The request from American Family Association is part of a new campaign from the ministry.
We're taking on big tech, and we're taking on companies like Apple. This is a new era in fighting for the protection of children and their innocence. And Apple's a key stakeholder here. Apple's a multi-billion-dollar company, the largest tech company in the world, and they need to take every precaution possible to protect minors from harmful content and to protect children from having their sexually explicit images shared on these Apple devices.
I'm Chris Woodward.
The National Hurricane Center today continues to track a tropical disturbance near the coast of the Carolinas that could become a named storm. Janice Dean with the latest.
But regardless of whether or not it becomes a depression or a tropical storm, still the same results, and that is gusty winds along the coast and some heavy rain. So this is a potential tropical cyclone. It has tropical characteristics, but we are expecting a quote-unquote landfall sometime within the next 24 hours. So we have tropical storm warnings in effect for parts of the Carolinas up towards Virginia.
U.S. stock indexes are drifting closer to their records as Wall Street gears up for the most anticipated meeting of the Federal Reserve in years. More news online at afn.net and on the AFN mobile app. I'm Rusty Q.
Thoughts of the child you were carrying keep pouring over in your mind. A deep, unrelenting sadness overshadows your days, and you wonder if you will ever feel whole again. There is hope and healing from a reproductive loss. Call the International Helpline, 866-482-LIFE, and talk with someone who has been where you are. Your call is confidential, and we will help you find healing. 866-482-LIFE.
Today's Issues continues on AFR with your host, Ed Vitagliano.
And welcome back, everybody. Ed Vitagliano sitting in for Tim Wildman this week. I'm joined in studio by Tony Vitagliano, one of our vice presidents. Dr. Alex McFarland is with us, and now Chris Woodward steps into the news guy spot.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, depending on where our listeners are situated. So, did you have a good weekend?
I did. It was. We had just kind of stayed indoors with all the rain, but we rested. Had a good time.
Yeah.
Good
Sorry
church
about
service.
the Dolphins.
Well, let me tell you something. The good Lord tried to tell me something a long time ago about sports. When he allowed me in my own free will to root for the Atlanta Braves, the Miami Dolphins, and the Mississippi State Bulldogs. I usually, there is a season for weeping
And for me, it's usually any season.
Yeah,
any season.
But I'm not bitter. Yeah, the Dolphins season pretty much is cooked right now. They did sign a guy today, a backup QB from Baltimore, who's been around a few teams. So Tua is not likely to return anytime soon.
I don't really care about the Dolphins, Chris. I was just being polite.
Well, I'm not. See, that's the thing. I'm not old enough to remember like when they were really good. I wasn't
I
alive.
remember when they were really good.
I wasn't alive in the 70s. I'm not old enough to remember 80s Marino. I remember like old hobbled up fake Spike Marino in the 90s. But that's why I was a fan. And
Spike Marino.
See, this is what we do. It's a coping mechanism.
Yes.
I'm a State fan.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just you go through the list of excuses like, well, we've had a few injuries, and it'll turn around. And
Well, I'm a Notre Dame fan, and we killed Purdue. We killed them.
It's an in-state battle there, Notre Dame and Purdue.
All right. So Tim's not here today, so we don't have to spend as much time talking about college football, but we did a little bit. So
we did.
And that, by the way, I'm surrounded here at AFA. Folks, you all probably know our home base, our headquarters are in Tupelo, Mississippi. And so I am just always surrounded by people talking about Mississippi State and Ole Miss. And I'm perhaps the only Notre Dame fan here in the building, so I just keep my mouth shut. I don't even get involved in it.
Well, I will tell you this. If you want to, you're certainly welcome. There will probably be a lot of seats available. But UMass is coming to Mississippi State in November if you want to go see the Minutemen take on the Bulldogs.
It's probably going to be competitive.
Probably will.
The way the season's going, so.
Probably will.
All right. So what do we got here? What news bringeth thou?
Well, you guys spent the last hour talking about the Trump assassination attempt, and rightly so. I want to shift gears and talk about something else in the political world, that being some comments that Kamala Harris's running mate, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, made at a recent human rights campaign event. This was earlier this month, but the AP is still running hard and heavy with this because it is a big issue amongst some voters this November. Here now is Governor Tim Walz at a human rights campaign earlier this month, talking about all the great things that he and other Democrats did for the LGBTQ community, and then I'll bring in some reaction for you. But let's begin with clip 9.
And so when we got the majority in Minnesota, for the first time in over a decade, we had the governor's office, we had the House, and we had the Senate by one vote. And we got busy. First thing we did is we banned conversion therapy in Minnesota. We protected transgender community and said, in Minnesota, you are seen, heard, loved, and respected, and safe in Minnesota. And we did something a little bit. We banned banning books, especially banning LGBTQ books for themes in that.
So he's getting a lot of reaction there for things.
Now,
By the way,
the Human Rights Campaign is the largest pro-homosexual lobby group in the country.
Yes. And by the way, conversion therapy is a generic term that people on the left, specifically those that support radical LGBTQ initiatives, that's something they use in place of counseling therapy. So if someone goes to, for example, a pastor or a Christian counsel for unwanted same-sex attractions, even that is not allowed now in the state of Minnesota.
Would that be criminalized?
Or
could you just lose a license?
You could lose your license for doing
so we're not talking when conversion therapy is that kind of overly broad label that a lot of people think is so electroshock therapy. Well, I don't think that's very good either.
Right.
But this law would include that, of course.
Yes.
But it would also go to the pastor counseling or the Christian counselor.
Exactly.
With who's licensed or certified, who's counseling someone who comes and says, I don't want these same-sex feelings. How can you help me? They could lose their license.
Right, and that is something that Liberty Counsel, Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel, has been going to court for a long time now. We've got a ton of stories about his efforts there. So when you hear the words conversion therapy, it's not just the bad shock therapy stuff that even we would denounce, but it's the talk therapy of going to a pastor or a counselor for. That's a huge concern there.
Chris, what about the books? I mean, it just sounds like they're wanting to keep people from burning books out in the street.
Right.
These are innocent books, right?
Well,
I'm sure that
plays into the whole mindset that people on the right are all Nazis. The Nazis burned books. The people on the right are Nazis. They're book burners too. But even if you go back far enough, there have been efforts on the left, not just in Minnesota, but out in California, other parts of the country, where governors and Democrat-run legislatures have banned books like Huck Finn and stuff like that because they didn't To Kill a Mockingbird. All these things because they didn't like cultural depictions. So the left often is guilty of trying to ban books. I will say this: it's not banning books; they're getting rid of them from like school libraries where a kid doesn't need to get that. You can still get it from your library.
Pornographic.
Yes,
right?
this is absolutely disingenuous. Is a kind way of saying what Tim Walz said. It's a lie to say that Christians are wanting to quote unquote ban books. And I know we're going to get back to the issue of conversion therapy and so on and so forth. But what parents are complaining about, to your point, Tony, is pornographic and explicit depictions of homosexuality in books that are available for kids, little kids and teenagers. And parents say they want those removed. And the fact of the matter is, listen, AFA has battled with the American Library Association since the 90s, when this organization, which controls most public libraries in the country and most of the libraries, I'm guessing, in public schools, we wanted simple filters on the computers in public libraries to keep underage kids from accessing pornography. And the American Library Association said, no, we're opposed to that. So the fact of the matter is, in every library in the country, librarians censor all the time. And by censor, I mean they make decisions about what books go in the library. The librarian does that.
Right.
Parents don't do it. The librarian does it. So somebody's making the decision. Parents are saying, we want to have an impact on that process.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of lies we get from the left when they try to shade the meaning so that it makes conservatives look like book-burning Nazis.
Right. And with 50 days to go until Election Day, we can expect to hear more about this, probably talk about it on this show, because Democrats are counting on these people, these radical LGBTQ people, to show up and vote for them and try to get them to 270 votes.
Let's go ahead and get this reaction to Tim Walz's comments, and then we're going to bring Alex in.
Okay. This now is Arthur Scopper of Mass Resistance talking to AFN about this, about Tim Walz and his comments here. Clip 6.
Tim Walz is like the most aggressive, radical, progressive in the country. This guy is Gavin Newsom with less hair, colder weather. This guy is a complete LGBT fanatic, and they are going to do everything they can to normalize this agenda across the board. You will see them rushing through the Equality Act, which expands the Civil Rights Act protections to include sexual orientation and gender identity. If we are fortunate enough to see a Trump and especially a J.D. Vance presidency come November, our work is only beginning. We've got so many people still believing the lies, and Tim Walz is the epitome of that.
Alex, there's an old expression about the camel getting its nose under the tent, under the flap, and the LGBTQ movement is that metaphor. Perfect. It's a perfect metaphor for that. We could be facing in this country an all-out assault on religious freedom and specifically Christianity, like they have in the UK, like they have in Canada, where a radio network like ours, I fully expect if Kamala Harris wins the presidency, you talk about weaponizing the Justice Department to go after Donald Trump here in the past. I think that she will weaponize the federal bureaucracy to go after radio networks like ours to take away our licenses because we talk about what the Bible says.
Yeah. And I want to say to my fellow pastors out there, pastors, I beg of you, I plead with you to get in your pulpit and use your platform to influence your parishioners to vote. By the way, on my own website, alexmcfarland.com/vote, I wrote what we call a first-time voter's guide. If you haven't voted in years or if you're a first-time voter, what you should care about in this election. And this thing about Tim Walz speaking to the Human Rights Campaign. The Human Rights Campaign is global. They're all over the world. They're in bed with the UN. And there are two things we really ought to point out is they are making a behavior an ethnicity. Homosexual activity is a behavior. It is not an ethnicity. You know, in a legal sense, in a constitutional sense, they talk about mutable and immutable characteristics. And homosexual behavior or transgender behavior, this is not an immutable, inherent characteristic you're born with. It isn't. And so, pastors, here's the thing. If Christianity becomes a prosecutable offense, telling people that certain behaviors are sin in the eyes of God, that sin must be repented of to turn to Christ and be saved. If it becomes illegal for us to spread the gospel of how one can be redeemed and given new life in Jesus, it's going to be too late. And all of these fellow pastors of mine that say, "Oh, Alex, we live for heaven. God hasn't called us to save the world." Well, Matthew 28:18-20, Christ said, "Go into all the world, make disciples, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you." And if it becomes illegal to live and preach and proclaim the full counsel of God, well, then we just can't be the church that Christ has called us to be. But we have an opportunity. We have a little window of opportunity to save our free constitutional Judeo-Christian republic. And we've got to pray, we've got to vote. The window of opportunity is closing, and I fear closing quickly.
Tony, it's we have been hearing, and Alex mentioned this in our story meeting this morning, and Brother Bert Harper has mentioned this as well. We are hearing from pastors, and first of all, let me just say, pastors they believe they have to answer to God, of course. I'm not going to lecture pastors, but we are hearing that some pastors, I don't know what the percentage would be like, seem reticent to get involved or to encourage their congregations to get involved in this election because, in their opinion, neither of the main candidates, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, appear to be, of course we have no idea of knowing what's in the heart, but appear that they are not explicitly Christian, okay? And we all know with Donald Trump, there are concerns on the part of some people about, some of his views, some of his actions, and these pastors seem to be struggling with encouraging their folks to get involved. Listen, I don't think that it's unfair to say that this may very well be the most important election. Let me just say this, in my lifetime. And for Christians to be on the sidelines and not involved, I just think is a dereliction of Christian duty.
Amen.
I agree.
Amen.
I mean, I think we've become complacent as Christians. I think we've enjoyed our freedoms and rights for so long that we don't ever think that they can be taken away from us. Mm-hmm. And we think they're always available there to us. And if I don't vote in this election, I'll just vote in the next one. Well, like you said, I think sitting on the sidelines in this election has it has the potential for us to suffer 10 years of persecution. And if you need to talk to other believers around the world who don't have a voice in their own governments. And if you ask them, hey, if you had the opportunity to vote in your election that would oust the regime that you're currently sitting, whose boot you're currently sitting under, who won't let you gather in public, who won't let you speak openly about the gospel and share your faith, would you vote in that election? And I have to believe that Christians around the world would say, yes, if I had the ability, if I had the choice to vote, I would vote. I'm reminded of Paul in Acts invoking his Roman citizenship numerous times before Roman leaders and Roman rulers. and he invoked it. And if Paul felt like it was something inherently evil, who obviously the Roman Empire was very pagan,
right.
very evil, and not Christian by any means. But if Paul felt that he was justified in invoking his Roman citizenship and using that, then we as Christians in America should also feel okay with invoking our citizenship and our rights in voting in this election.
Alex,
Amen.
you want to toss it again?
Yeah, I've had pastors say to me as recently as last week, they'll say, well, Alex, America is going to go how it goes. My home is in heaven. Here's the thing. Our free nation is really like a tool. It's a tool for living and sharing the gospel. Mm-hmm. Now, your church building is a tool. Now, if your church building gets a leak in the roof and needs repair, do you just say, well, you know what? Yes, I know the roof is leaking, but, I'm just going to trust God. No.
Our home is in heaven.
That's it.
My home is in heaven. God didn't call me to save a leaky roof. No. Look, it's only good stewardship. And I love what you said there, that Paul, when it was expedient, would invoke his Roman citizenship. Jesus, by the way, Neil Mauman, who's a great scholar and a longtime friend, Neil Mauman talks about when Jesus was, interacting with the Sadducees and Pharisees, that was really the Senate of that time, if you would. So we Christians, I think we have a stewardship obligation to repair this wonderful tool called a free America and encourage your people to vote. And let me just say this for the record. No man knows another person's heart. Mm-hmm. And I barely know my own heart. Jeremiah 17 alludes to the darkness of the heart. Two men that I've known for many years, one of whom I worked for, James Dobson, a man of unimpeachable integrity, Dr. Robert Jeffers, brilliant man. Both of these men prayed with Donald Trump when he and Dobson shared the gospel, and Trump, when I've heard him many times, but in February of this year in Nashville, before the National Religious Broadcasters, Donald Trump said, and this is a nearly verbatim quote, but he said, "I have put my faith in Christ. I am a Christian believer. I have trusted Christ for my salvation." Now, here's my point. I've got a lot of Christian friends that say, well, I'm not going to vote for Trump. He's an old pagan. No, he is not. And who are the pastors to question a man who says he is a believer in Jesus? Jeffers and Dobson prayed the sinner's prayer with him. But my point is this: whether or not Trump is an exemplary disciple of Christ, that's between him and God. My point is, if you care about saving the unborn, if you care about peace in the Middle East, if you care about protecting the Constitution and the rights of tax-paying American citizens, everything about America versus Marxism, come on, people, have the conviction and the courage to speak about voting and encourage people to be Christians, to be registered and to vote. And I suspect many of my fellow pastors, it's lack of conviction and lack of courage that they're being silent. And this just isn't right, brothers. Come on.
Amen. And folks, listen, I absolutely think you should be voting at the top of the ticket for president. Okay, we've done our best to convince you, but certainly don't stay home. Mm-hmm. If you're having a difficult time taking a pick between Trump and Harris, you still have Senate votes. You still have House of Representatives. In a lot of places, you're voting for governors. You're voting for all kinds of things. Don't stay home. That is the absolute worst thing you can do. And folks, let me just also remind you that one of the divisions here at American Family Association is the iVoter Guide.
Right.
iVoterGuide.com. iVoterGuide.com. You can go there. If you are not registered yet, it's an easy, non-embarrassing way to get registered. Okay? You don't have to go to someone and say, I haven't voted in 20 years. I'm embarrassed to say that. You can do that online. iVoter Guide tells you how to do that. iVoter Guide will have, as we get closer to the election, will have comprehensive guides on all the major candidates and all the major federal races, also state races, even in some places down ballot for legislators, and in some cases even for, I think, maybe some, I don't know if they go all the way down to school board.
They do.
They do.
Yeah, I mentioned this last week. I'll share a screenshot of Debbie's article, but Debbie Wethnow of iVoter Guide wrote a recent article in AFA The Stand, what used to be called AFA Journal, or the AFA Journal, but she talked about the importance of down-ballot races. We don't just elect a president every 4 years. Every election, we elect a number of things. So when you do get your ballot this November, you are going to be voting on president, but you're also going to be most likely, well, you're definitely going to vote on a representative. You might vote on a U.S. senator. You'll have a number of state and local elections. And she points out that, look, a lot of people that are in politics today started out in local offices.
Right.
So today's school board members could be tomorrow's congressman or senator. So that is why it is important that you research these people and you do show up to vote, so that way they don't win an election 46-2 or something because only a few people voted.
Yeah, iVoterGuide.com, folks. This is the most detailed voter guide out there. Alex, you also mentioned, did you have something on your website that you had you'd written an article or something about voting?
Yeah, thank you, Ed. alexmcfarland.com/vote. And by the way, I've interviewed Debbie Wethnow many times, and we heartily endorse the iVoter Guide. But on my own website, I wrote what to consider when voting. I've got a downloadable PDF I created that's like a bulletin insert. It's nonpartisan. It's just why we should vote. It's a stewardship issue. What are the issues? It's completely nonpartisan, but I would encourage people, and if churches want some of what to consider when voting that I wrote, email me. I'll send you some of these printouts, or you can download the bulletin insert and print them yourselves.
And folks, let me just make one last pitch to you if you're trying to decide whether to vote. And I've used this example many, many times. Alex alluded to it as well. But for those who say it's all going to burn and there's no need to get involved, we should only be concerned about going to heaven, you don't treat your car that way. If it starts to make noise, you take it to the mechanic. If you start to have heart palpitations, guess what? You go see the doctor. Well, why? It's all going to burn. So if you take that kind of effort, as Alex said, to fix your roof, to fix your car, to make sure your body stays healthy, why wouldn't you fix this republic if you can give it a shot?
That's right.
And go to the ballot and to the ballot box and vote. All right, folks, that is all the time we have for this edition of Today's Issues. For Tony Vitagliano, Dr. Alex McFarland, Fred Jackson, and Chris Woodward, thank you for joining us. More great programming directly ahead on American Family Radio, and Lord willing, we'll see you on this program tomorrow.